we're live.
Good morning, everyone, and my name is Rebecca Sibanda. I will be your host in today's edition of The Midpoint, and I'm going to go right ahead and introduce our speakers. First, we have Dr. Claus Kotzer, who is a fellow at the UCT Law's Center for Rhetoric Studies, and he is a concerned South African who writes and thinks on public affairs and strategic communications. His paper is the one that has brought us together today, and he is reflecting on 25 years of the South African Constitution and the fact that we need to do more than just have it on paper, to live it. And I think we're going to have an interesting discussion about what our responsibility is as citizens to our democratic project. Our second speaker needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. He is one of the first justices from the Constitutional Court in the early 90s, Judge Albie Sachs. He is a lawyer, an anti-apartheid activist, author, and a scholar, and he's going to be giving some of his insights in response to Dr. Kotzer's paper. Finally, we have Mr. Ongama. I'm going to try and say your name properly. Mtimka. He is a lecturer at the Department of History and Political Studies at the Nelson Mandela University. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and a Master's in South African Politics and Political Economy from Nelson Mandela University, where he's currently also pursuing his PhD. He has over 15 years in media, in marketing, and communications, and I think his insights as a historian and political mind will also be instrumental. Before we begin, I'm going to just quickly hand over to the CAS representative, Christian Endres, who is the project manager at CAS, to just give us a bit of a background on CAS and the conversation we're about to have. Chris?
Good. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Good morning to the audience and good morning to our wonderful presenters. So I have the opportunity to introduce myself as a representative of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. We support the Midpoint series of webinars as a way of promoting centrist politics in South Africa. Centrist politics that are not beholden to the idea of libertarian no-state government, but also not beholden to complete state control of government, the midpoint, the middle point in politics. When we had the opportunity of supporting this paper by Dr. Claus Kotzer, we were thrilled to come across it, because it really embodies this idea of the center of politics. And in its appeal to sensible language and living the language of central politics, like in the Constitution, it makes a crucial point at a time of increasing social unrest in South Africa and increasing audacity on the part of our leaders in misusing language in a way that threatens our well-being. So I'd like to quickly, because I have very little time, draw our attention to the mendacity and the opportunity of language. The East German Republic after the Nazi period was called the German Democratic Republic. And during its period, there were enormous human rights abuses. North Korea's full name is the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. Now, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and Germany in modern day could not stand more counter to the ideals of the German Democratic Republic and the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. These words are empty because they are not associated with the acts that go with the words. Now, to bring us back to another point in history, when Hitler came to power, he did not win an absolute majority. And to take power, an election was necessary in what was then the Parliament of Germany, where the delegates had to hand over the democratic state to the Nazi party. A vote was required, a democratic vote. Behind each delegate stood an armed guard. They duly voted to dissolve the democratic state. Now, I would argue that voting itself is not enough to promote a democracy. It has to be substantiated and embodied in proper behavior. Similarly, in South Africa, when we speak about the rule of law, what we mean is that everybody is accountable and in some way circumscribed in their power, rather than that judges are some kind of prince or king that lord over us. And I'm sure that Albie is going to tell us more about the limitations of power. The language matters because it sets our mind in the right place. And let us not be deceived by people who use language to misdirect us from their actions. The government that speaks about accountability and yet steals at the time of a pandemic the monies required to keep us safe should not be trusted. So these are some of the things that we should keep in mind. We speak about state capture, a wonderful term, but I would argue that we should speak about ANC capture first, much like President Mbeki and President Mondlane in previous times have indicated, where they said that careerists have taken over the ANC. So I'd like to make one final point, which is that a democracy that promotes our human rights and our human dignity rests on three different pieces. And these are not in some ways imagined, but they have been tested and they've been established internationally through practice. The first is institutions that limit power and hold leaders accountable. The second is mechanisms to ensure that leaders have integrity and are selected on their integrity. And the third is an educated, civically aware population that makes sure that both the institutions and the leaders are filled with life. So that rounds me off to say that the Konrad Adenauer Foundation's main business is civic education, because we want the population to understand both the need of institutions and leaders of integrity, and to take responsibility for their democracy. So thank you very much again for giving me the opportunity of saying 5 words, and I look forward to what's going to be, I'm sure, an engaged discussion, as it always is when Albie is in the room. Thank you, gentlemen. And Rebecca, I hand the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Christian. I'm going to quickly, without wasting any time, ask Klaus to take over and speak to us on his paper, 25 Years of the South African Constitution, Reflections and Realizations.
Good morning, and thank you very much. I have got some prepared remarks, so just to keep us within, or keep me within my time constraint, and I'm just going to go right ahead. So my short presentation will consist of 2 sections. First, I wish to reflect on my paper, which itself reflects on 25 years of the South African Constitution. I will then look forward at how we must do better if we are going to achieve 50 years or reach 50 years. The description of the discussion here refers to President Ramaphosa's comment following the recent national unrest. He said on July 12th that this is not who we are as South Africans. This is not us. My paper, written well before July, I look at the question of who we are. It is the Constitution as the national foundational document that tells us who we are and guides us to realize our democratic goals. Democracy, of course, as suggested by the paper, was not simply achieved in 1994. Democracy is a process that requires the commitment and action of all citizens. It requires deliberation. It is through the use of our language that constitutional ideals are articulated and advanced. Without the popular application of constitutional principles, in word and deed, our precarious state faces disintegration. Just as the events in July have demonstrated the rejection of the social political status quo, so too we need personal and deliberate acts to build and actualize a legitimate state. We must refocus, thereby not only looking at what we are protesting against, but remind ourselves for what we are fighting for. Active constitutionalism is the recognition and pursuit of dignity and justice for all. Recognition here is, of course, key. It is not about making grand statements, but taking place through everyday practice, through our conversations and our use of language. To socially recognize and be recognized is foundational to a reconciled and transformed state. In the paper, I referred to the metaphor of the Constitution as a bridge. The interim Constitution of 1993 states that, and I quote, "The Constitution provides a historic bridge between the past and deeply divided society characterized by strife, conflict, untold suffering, and injustice. and a future founded on the recognition of human rights, democracy, and peaceful coexistence and development opportunities for all South Africans. The structural image of the bridge is fitting. We must physically use the Constitution to cross towards a legitimate state. This crossing did not happen with the commencement of democracy. Instead, it is a continuous process whereby we must embody this transformed state. In our digitally dominant world, more and more of our politics takes place online. It is becoming more haphazard, more populist, and less organized. While the digital revolution seemingly offers the opportunity for exchange, public deliberation has actually been a casualty of modernization. Arguments rarely advance claims through debate. Instead, our digital exchanges emphasize personal identity, praising one set of beliefs and blaming another. And this grandstanding runs contrary to consensus making. Language has taken on increased significance. Essentialized truths are too often relied upon. Factional, delegitimizing, anti-constitutional language cannot be left unanswered. If such language is not countered using democratic values, we corrode the gains of democracy and eventually democracy itself. It is worth remembering that it was through rejecting the South Africa as a country apart that the battle for the democratic state was won. We need to mobilize that same unity of purpose to reject those instigating violence, racism, and other invective that seeks to break us again apart. So where do we go to from here? South Africa's greatest threat is for our constitutional order to be popularly delegitimized. This, I would say, is the strategy of Jacob Zuma and his cabal. But more dangerous are the millions of people who are increasingly and understandably starting to lose faith in the state. These are overwhelmingly not criminals. Instead, their living conditions, the services they receive, and their prospects show that the constitutional bridge remains to them a fiction. While government has much to improve, it is yet again, by and large, up to the society to observe and instill meaning and find paths of betterment. It is the people, through their words and deeds, that realize a just state. South Africa, as per the Constitution, remains in a permanent state of transformation. It is here that we as a society have failed, and this I think is obvious to us all. To prevent further social collapse, we must take ownership of the state. We must return to critical transformation guided by deliberation. We need to admit our failures, transcend narrow conceptions, establish a national identity, and pursue an ethos through comprehensive national strategies. This is not about party politics. We cannot hide behind high walls of concrete, history, or ideology. It is therefore essential that if we are to commemorate 50 years of the Constitution, that we return to and reinvigorate our national social compact. Social compacts bring people together in the ongoing practice of democracy. Compacts are destroyed when citizens use destructive language. By engaging in respectful communication, people transcend trust deficits and, importantly, set the example for others to follow. Social compacts is the deliberate recognition and embodiment of the Constitution's reconciliatory ethos. Seeing another as a person through whom one can advance one's own humanity affords dignity to both the self and the other. It is herein that the Republic, and I refer to what Chris said earlier about the German Democratic Republic and North Korea, that the Republic should not only and cannot only be a word, it must be what it is from Latin, the public thing, that which unites us all. If we are to be a republic, we need to be that in practice. And one concluding remark on how we can do this today, like never before, we are all engaged in production of meaning. Through our social media and media activities, our constant communication, we are given the opportunity to give expression to the society we want to live in. To ensure a dignified and democratic future, we must use the digital realm as a force for good. Web platforms must be places of active democracy, yet they cannot be dominated by external conglomerates. Like so much else, we need local articulation and guiding perceptions. We can use this as a strategic foundation to build a new South African lexicon. Herein, we must incorporate our national ethos in our everyday exchange, thereby guiding how we talk about politics and society going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Klaus. I think that your paper is very insightful, and it demands a lot of South African citizens in the sense that we shouldn't rely too much on our leadership to lead us in terms of how we engage with the Constitution. So I think that's a very good place to start and something to reflect on. I'm going to hand over to Judge Albie to respond to Klaus's paper. Judge Albie?
I'm pausing a little bit because no one can be against what you said. We've got to be more rational. We've got to listen to each other. We've got to be thoughtful. We have to be honest. Of course, these things are great. And I support that. And I'm Mr. Nice Guy. I'm so nice, people don't even trust me. It can't be true. What I find missing in your analysis and in the wider paper is dealing with rage. And rage upsets me. I'm an anti-rage person. In 1990, when change was beginning in South Africa, an American journalist writing op-eds for the New York Times, I knew him as Tony, he said, Albie, okay, now you're going back to South Africa. They put a bomb in your car, they blew you up, you lost an arm. Now's your chance to get back at them. And you must be furious. And I said, Tony, you know, I thought there's something wrong with me. I'm supposed to be a revolutionary. Even when I was in jail, I thought, what's the matter with you, Albie? When the guard walked away after putting the tin plate of food in my cell, I should have been thinking about getting a knife and plunging it into his back. And I didn't. And I'm a failure. What's the matter with me? He said, Albie, you can relax. I've spoken to Mandela and I've spoken to Sisulu and Kathrada, and they're all saying the same thing. They're all smiling. They're saying, great, we can go back now. So the culture of my struggle, of my leaders, is not one of rage. It's not one of vengeance. It's not one of anger. On the contrary, it's a transformation and change. You refer more in your paper than you did today to reconciliation. And again, I'm totally in favor of reconciliation. I actually ended up shaking the hand of the man who put the bomb in my car through the TRC process, because he came forward, acknowledged what he'd done. But at the same time, the reconciliation for millions of particularly young South Africans was always one-sided. That we are the ones called upon to forgive. And not just a little thing, centuries of oppression, exclusion, marginalization, denial of our humanity, of our human capacities. And we were willing to do that, and from the side of those who benefited from all this massive exploitation and unfairness, they're saying, well, it's over now. Apartheid is gone. We've all got our rights. It's finished. What's the problem? And there's no, in that sense, deep insight into these troubled areas. So I'm going to, in that sense, speak against myself as a natural reconciler and as somebody who doesn't belong to the culture of rage. But rage is, in a sense, often authentic. It's deep, true emotion. I saw it in so many of the Fees Must Fall people. It was like an anger that was boiling over. And they said, we are tired of being polite. We are tired of deliberation. It's the people who've got everything. They want calmness. They want stability. They want tranquility. They want an exchange of rational ideas. We're sick and tired of that. We're tired of our anger being curated by others who are telling us, as Blake Modasani put, eternal students are at the table of good manners. We need to come out and be angry and express our anger. And I'm going to bring that up to date now with some reflections I had at the time of the insurrection, the looting, call it what you will. And it affected me very profoundly, very deeply, that people, many of whom had been in the struggle for freedom, were now trashing our constitutional order. And for me, this wasn't rage. This was manipulated emotion to achieve particular purposes, connived at. It wasn't a spontaneous, authentic feeling of deep anger at all the oppression, all the inequality, all the injustice, and manipulating the hunger of people for goods, for food, and so on, into looting. And even the theme of detention without trial was cropping up. Now, I was detained without trial. It was horrible, in isolation, and thousands of us were. I was subjected to sleep deprivation. I was privileged even in my torture. I wasn't given electric shock treatment. But detention without trial for us was cruel. It was massive. And people say torture doesn't get results. Torture does get results, sadly and terribly. And I'm thinking now, people are angry the government is not cracking down on these villains. And we were trying to overthrow the government. They martyred many people. They didn't stop us from the struggle. And I remember a vow I gave to myself in that solitary confinement. Never, never, never again will I do anything to allow this to happen to anybody in future. It's like a vow. And I think many of our generation did that. So if you wanted to, we could have 90-day law. We could have detention without trial. We could get people and donor them. We could find out who the masterminds of this whole thing was. But we're not doing that. And the government is being blamed for not cracking down, for not being tough enough. And I'm saying to myself, thank heavens we are not doing that. We're not using the weapons of the repressive state of the enemy. Thank heavens we've got a constitution. Thank heavens we have the rule of law. And it takes longer. It takes longer, and maybe we don't catch the crooks and we can't get the evidence. And we can't bring people to come and testify knowing they'll be beaten up again if they don't point a finger at those who created this terrible mayhem. The main response is a political one, rather than the state power one to try and eliminate the people responsible. And in the long run, it's better. And so I'm so proud of our Constitution. Even although we're paying a price, our hands are tied in terms of getting the evidence we want. I'm so proud of our judiciary, which has been quite remarkable, and which in a sense is holding the democratic project together. I'm so proud we created an institution. I'm so proud we have a judge who is unafraid to speak to a former president if she thinks on behalf of the court that he has been guilty of wrongdoing in a very, very defiant way. So I see so many positives in this terrible period. And maybe the biggest positive is we are not letting go of constitutionalism. We're not going in for strong arm methods. We're not calling for a kind of dictatorship to root out this terrible evil. We're taking the longer road, the harder road of the rule of law, collecting the evidence, explaining people, having elections. And to my mind, that's what's going to keep our country together, much more than krachtdadigheid, cracking down, which many people are longing for, could possibly do.
Thank you so much, Judge Albie. You actually touched on something that I thought as I read through Klaus's paper, the rage element, and how so many people are moving through South Africa experiencing exclusion, and they can't really engage with the ideals of the Constitution the way that those who are on the other side are. I think it's a very, very, it's an astute point, and I really appreciate you mentioning it. Before I move on to Ongama, I'm going to just remind everyone that Klaus's paper is available for download in the chat. Chris has posted it. It's also going to be made available on the website post the event. So I'm going to hand over now to Ongama.
Good morning once again, everyone, and thank you for insightful presentations. Thanks to our main author and presenter today, Dr. Claus Kotzer, and also Judge Albie Sachs. It's really great, being part of this conversation and grapple with key issues that affect our democratic and constitutional order in South Africa. I think from the onset, I must state that I broadly agree with Dr. Kotz's main argument in the paper around this idea that in South Africa, we truly had an amazing transformation process and a document that we can be proud about that actually outlines the ideal that we are committing ourselves to, and that the constitutional process, constitution-making process, was a process for us of actually crafting the vision of the South Africa we want, mindful of where we had come from in a difficult and traumatic past in South Africa, and outlining what is it that we would like to achieve, both in terms of our conceptions of citizenship, but also in terms of the burden for social justice that was imposed upon us by the history we had and the choice we made in terms of what constitutional order we wanted. And I agree with the sentiment that what we are missing is, what we missed was a bold and affirmative conduct, which actually gave expression to those ideals in a way that sees people's lives changing. Now, within political science, we would differentiate between the existence of a democracy from a procedural and minimalist perspective, and the existence of a democracy measured on substantive measures. The latter tends to be instrumentalist in its approach, in the sense that we are asking, to what extent does existing in a democratic state create not just, particular institutional mechanisms to protect the democracy, but to what extent does the democracy lead to changes in people's lives? So that's a key focus in measuring democracies. And in fact, we also consider the extent to which failure to deal with those substantive elements continues to pose threats for the democratic order. And in order for a democracy to consolidate, it's vital that not only do we create institutions that protect the democracy in terms of procedures and rules, but that substantively people begin to see that there are changes in their lives. Now, what's interesting from research is that South Africans, even though initially they tended to place greater emphasis on the substantive element, that is, on the instrumental, what does the democracy lead to? Over time, as the country has progressed, South Africans, in terms of their voter behavior, have also begun to be concerned for democracy for its own sake. So that's a good thing when people begin to value the extent to which our elections are free and fair, when they begin to also value things like regime performance, as opposed to being stuck to voting on the basis of what the broad groups prefer in terms of the political divide, the political parties that exist along the political divide. So our democracy has done significantly well in terms of transformation and reaching stages where it's consolidated. But I want to come to what Judge Albie Sachs was saying in terms of failure to deal with rage. So we talk about, when studying conflicting countries, that you see, there's what we call a permissive environment for civil war, among other things. And those arise, the elements of that permissive environment are grievances that exist in the country that are not being attended to. Now, according to McGuinty, it's not necessarily the existence of that permissive environment that triggers civil war, but the existence of political elites, usually in the army or among the groups in the polity of the country, that exploit those grievances and push the nation towards civil war. So it's not the existence of grievances themselves that actually triggers conflict, but failure to deal with them, and then the exploitation of those grievances by particular groups in a country for their own narrow political agendas, by the way. But unfortunately, the average person, and this is said of relationships among comrades. Comrades are people who are against the same things. So the political elites may not necessarily be for the ideals that the masses are for. But unfortunately, laws of mobilization and comrade relationships are that as long as they are saying the same things that we're against, we think that they are for what we are for. And therefore, it's not uncommon that in fights like in the recent in the recent looting, that the political elites may have been pursuant to a constitutionally destructive agenda of intimidating the judiciary so that it never again acts against the politically powerful. The masses, on the other hand, see an opportunity that has been availed by the chaos that comes with an objective to actually threaten a constitutional order. But obviously, it still results in the expropriation of those resources for that short-term period. And, it gives a reprieve, no matter how flawed the process is. So then the point becomes, to what extent do we, as the rest of society, protect the democratic order by finding our role in history, finding our place in history, through ensuring that we actually help to build the constitutional state by acting wherever we are in positions of privilege to respond to the underlying grievances that exist in our society. Unfortunately, our reliance on one politician who's going to come with the silver lining, it's not going to help us. We need to take collective responsibility to overcome the challenges that have confronted our country, and that is going to take collaboration between big business, between civil society organizations, between private citizens and the state, or what was called in the Dinokeng scenarios, the working together aspect of one of the futures we could choose. So we've got a responsibility, as Emperor Haile Selassie once said, that throughout history, it has been the inaction of those who should have acted, the indifference of those who should have known better, and the silence of the voice of justice when it mattered most that have made it possible for evil to triumph. So we've got to respond to the call of our generation and ensure that we do all that is in our power to create a different permissive environment than one that is vulnerable to exploitation by political crooks.
Thank you so much, Ongama. And I think that your input is also it posed very important questions. And I think for me, the most important was how we understand our role as citizens. How do we conceptualize citizenship? And I think once we understand that, only then can we begin to take the necessary steps to deliberately uphold and participate in our social contract. I'm going to now begin with the discussion, but before I do so, Judge Albie, you are muted. Are you able to unmute yourself? On your screen, there should be a blue icon with a microphone on and they turn audio on. No, I can't hear you still. I can see you.
It's the button next to the blue one. So when you press the blue one, that was the camera, and next to it, that should be the microphone. Sorry, Rebecca, we switched them off because there were dogs in the background and we were trying to quieten them down. Great. That's the button of the camera, and next to it, there should be the button for the microphone.
You're on.
There we go. We can hear you now.
Okay.
Sorry for that.
What a relief.
Okay,
Rebecca, kick us off.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris.
so much.
So we have obviously questions coming in through the chat, but because I'm moderator, I'm going to monopolize a few minutes for myself. For you, Klaus, there's something you mentioned in your paper, and it speaks to how the Constitution operates, and that we are perhaps in a perpetual state of transition, that we're never really going to achieve this perfect space where everybody is engaging with the Constitution the way that they should. And do you think that that is discouraging, especially for individuals who aren't yet where they feel they should be? If we're still litigating for access to basic rights, if people are still protesting, what does the perpetual state of transition or perpetual state of anticipation and aspiration mean for the indigent?
Thank you. I from my reading, and I'm no constitutional expert, but from my reading, it is what I would like to return to in a second. Is it was strategic for that to be the case, that South Africa is in a state of transition, in that we cannot employ or impose a system which will overnight fix all the problems. I heard the word, I think Albie mentioned, kragdadigheid, and that was an imposition of violence or force to ensure a certain system functions. And I believe that this perpetual state of transition is not a flaw, although it might be seen as a flaw when we and our leaders do not apply the ideals of the Constitution, but instead it is a constant striving. And I think strategically that was a very wise decision, in that given the dynamics of the transition, that it could not have broken down the state in order to start from anew. And I now will link that to what I wanted to mention earlier regarding the other comments, if I may quickly take this opportunity, in that there's so much that there's to be angry and rageful and vengeful about. Trauma has not been nearly dealt with or attended to. But as I commented in my piece and also in my contribution earlier, I see the delegitimization or the destruction of the system of the state as the greatest threat, because if we get to that point where we lose everything in order to build everything up again, if following the thinking of fallism, not to criticize, because I think the ideology or the thinking behind fallism is very useful, but to think that, oh, let's just break down the state completely because then we can build it up again, that leads us to all kinds of things that we have no control about. And so I see that what we have, we must work with. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of strategy and believing in how do we achieve the state? How do we achieve the transformed state? And that is only by applying the ideals step by step by step, keeping institutions and functional, keeping politicians in check, but more than that, to actually think about where it is that we are going, to build together not just policies that come and go through different individuals, but to understand that this is what me personally, and all of us as citizens can do and should do, and to fundamentally say that we cannot, it's not in nobody's interest, and we cannot longer live in a traumatized, unequal, and failing really state as we are, because how much longer can it go? How can we justify living in a state or in a place that we are so scarred by our difference? So I think, again, instead of saying let's break everything down, let's protest, let's make everything fall, we must say, okay, what do we have in order to build up? And that's why, to link right back to the Constitution, that's what we have. That is our guiding foundational document. And we must live in a constant transition, recognizing the past and moving forward. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but it, I believe, touches on everything.
It does. Judge Albie, before I put the other questions to you, when we speak about rage, do you think that those people who are angry, those people who are hungry, sorry, Ongama, can you please mute your mic? Thank you. Let me start afresh. Those people who are hungry and poor and disadvantaged, are they able to truly participate in the social contract in those disadvantaged or from those disadvantaged positions?
Absolutely. You know, my experience in decades of struggle was the main fighters for freedom, for democracy were the poor, the disadvantaged, the most dependable, the most thoughtful. We didn't use the word Ubuntu so much in those days, but with the tiny resources that they had, people got together. They would hide the freedom fighters. They would find places for munitions of war, if you like, risking a lot for themselves. They would carry messages. There was a woman who had a big skirt that she would put pamphlets into to get around. So for me, these are the strengths, the strongest supporters of our potential democracy. And also my other thing that I draw on is people are very, very patient. They know it takes time. They know building institutions takes time. But what they can't stand is corruption, where they can be slow and build step by step. But if they find some people are creaming off and telling lies, then they get very desperate. But the recent actions to me were not the actions of hungry, poor people. They were actions of, somebody came in his Mercedes to pick up a fridge or whatever it was. That was gross manipulation of genuine hunger, but it's also a hunger for goods. It's part of our materialist world where things acquire a value and freedom recedes into the background. But I truly see, you know, what one sees on TV often, somebody in a remote rural area being interviewed and speaking in an African language, and such sense comes out. They're not posturing. They're not speaking to gain votes or to show off. They're speaking from real lived experience. And for me, it's that lived experience and the patience and the solidarity of the ordinary poor people that's South Africa's greatest strength. It was in the struggle days, and I think it will be in the future. It's the clever people like ourselves that I'm more distrustful of and more worried about than I am of the hungry people.
Thank you, Judge Albie. Ongama, I've got a question here from the chat, and I'm going to direct it to you. And Nicola Deacha is asking, how do we create a balance between the expectations of the state and our personal responsibility? And I think that speaks to the citizenship angle that I touched on earlier.
Sure. So here's what makes things difficult in South Africa. Ordinarily, where people are able to make a meaningful role in the socioeconomic spaces that they find themselves in, through employment, through or involvement in civic structures, among other things, we don't even have to ask the question, it happens. Mm-hmm. However, in South Africa, deeply entrenched inequalities make it impossible for people to meaningfully contribute in ways that are not just sustainable for the greater good, but also for themselves and their families. So if you look at the numbers of people who work, there's too few people who work. At the same time, we're entrapped in ideological debates about why it's difficult to have a basic income grant, which is something that, if approached from the values of Ubuntu, is a no-brainer, in fact, because, I mean, the society that I grew up in, it was not uncommon for the kind of distribution that is envisaged in things like basic income grants. So where, for example, a wealthy family would take a boy from a poor family who comes and stays for free, their education is being taken care of, and maybe they're staying with an elderly lady, they work, so they contribute and they are receiving something in return, and they grow up to become very successful. But on a broader scale, here's my view. In South Africa, we have to depart with this, or we'll do away with the tyranny of the measured, and if it's not measured, it's not happening. If you go to various communities, especially in rural areas, you will find that people are engaged in production of especially crops. So, for example, my wife comes from Bizana, an area which I frequently go. When you go there, what you find is that the average yield of maize per household is tremendous, is huge. So the only thing that keeps those people from meaningful participation in the greater economy is not failure to produce, but an environment that is not enabling for them to enter the mainstream markets. So when we calculate the stock of maize in South Africa, we never factor in huge amounts of maize produced in Bizana. That's not because it's not happening, but because we are tyrannical in our approach to measuring what happens, and therefore we are losing in terms of leveraging. And then let me look at another example. If you look at what's happening in rural communities, people grow small herds of sheep, among other things. One company, BKB, in the Eastern Cape, has found a way to connect those people in the global supply chain of wool. How do they do it? They don't force those people to run big factories. Rather, they come to the level of community, build sharing sheds, and make sure that those communities participate in the global value chain of wool. We can do it with beef. There's no reason why people cannot be meaningfully incorporated in the national value chain of meat production in South Africa. They're doing it. So we need to recognize people for what they do at their own levels and find ways in which we help them to have meaningful contribution in ways that actually have returns for themselves and that are practical, and not be fixated with big business. Research we did in Kucha showed that when you help grow local initiatives, you help grow their value chains, and therefore the impact, the multiplier effect into the regions becomes bigger. Thanks. So those are the practical ways in which we can do it.
Thank you. Those are amazing examples. Judge Albie, I have a question from the chat here from Felix Dube, and he says, we have seen that We have seen how political elements can exploit judicial decisions and process for their own gain. We have seen that they have the power to mobilize the people, even against democratic institutions, striking at the core of the foundation of this constitutional democracy. What do you think should be the attitude of the ConCourt when faced with political cases that could ignite this country into flames? Do you think that the ConCourt judges should stick by the letter of the law, or do you think that whenever they decide to handle such matters, they must be guided by the national interest to avoid conflict and build long-lasting peace? Do you think that judges should be concerned about the outcome of the decisions in politically flammable cases? Which is very topical right now, especially considering what we're talking about.
It's absolutely topical, and you know what I'm going to do? Zip, 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 zip. My colleagues up there, they will do their duty, their sworn oath, to uphold and defend the Constitution without fear, favor, or prejudice. These are not just beautiful words. They go to who you are as a judge. They go to who we were, what we were fighting for, what the Constitution is all about. And that's why I feel such pride in this institution. We're not an equal country, we're not a fair country, but we are a country where people speak their minds, and we are a country where the Constitution is exceptionally meaningful. And we're a country where we have judges up there, not my generation, a later generation, who I think are doing brilliant work. The Constitutional Court has achieved huge international fame. I think a study was done to measure something in the way we tell, not to measure intangibles, of which decisions of courts in the English language jurisdictions are most quoted by other courts: India, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, and so on. And Canada came first, and a close second was the South African Constitutional Court. So from being the pariah of the world, we've now become a leader in terms of thinking. And it's because it's an astute court, it's a clever court, but it's a court with heart, with feeling, and it resonates, it responds to the deep needs of South Africans to live in a just society. So I'll express my confidence in my colleagues on the court. I certainly wouldn't offer them any advice at all, other than to carry on upholding the Constitution, arguing with each other, giving the reasons for their decisions, and maintaining that core integrity that has been, to my mind, the hallmark, particularly of the Constitutional Court, but now of many, many other courts as well in the country.
Thank you, Judge Albie, for that very diplomatic answer. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to every single question in the chat. So before we close, one last question, I think, to Klaus. And it is from Sipiwe Dube. Part of the Fallist discourse is the recognition that, to invoke Audre Lorde, the democracy has been built with the master's tools, and these tools do not recognize their grievances. So how can one be asked to defend a system that they think doesn't actually account for them? She says that she thinks this kind of thinking is more prominent from the days of the apartheid, when the oppressed saw the law as not actually legal. So she wonders whether this logic continues to inform much of our contemporary suspicion of the constitutional order, which is, I think it's a very profound question. So if you can quickly, in a minute or two, just answer Sipiwe and we can round up. Okay,
it's a very good question, and I think it's a question that requires a lot of investigation and to consider democracy as something which is by itself carries some kind of meaning. I think, and this is my contribution, is the problem. Is part of the problem, because there is no democracy that exists out there. Every democracy is by itself. So, of course, the way we still think, and I think this is part of the decolonialist thinking that we require, is that we must measure ourselves according to others. We constantly, and I know I've been spending a lot of time in the academic space, we have this way of thinking according to, based on, and I think that is entirely part of the problem. And I think that's what the question leads to as well, is this matter of the master's tools. And I think this is where language and where rhetoric really comes in, because it's a process which it does not depend on too much ideology, but really invigorates from the bottom up. And I would like to, if I can take this opportunity to go back to something that Ongama said, which really got me thinking again to what I was talking about earlier, is this matter of what do people do on their own levels? And Albie mentioned that as well, is that this is the great successes of South Africa, is that if we stop being fixated upon the measured, upon what we're told from the outside by big business. I'm not trashing big business, but to say that we must be bound to the ideas that are coming from the formal sector or only from certain sectors, and be aspiring towards this crass materialism. This is all part of the problem I see, is that instead, and this is what I think Chris is going to appreciate this, I'm going to go back to the Constitution, because this is where we can gain understanding of who we are, where we must go, how we find our way, because it is so easy to get stuck in the master's tools, as the question went. And it's so difficult to actually start from the bottom up, but in the sense that it's difficult because it's so much easier if we talk in these fora or if we read books and so forth. But if we actually say, like, who is it that we are? What are the ideals that we have? Then only through that can we put together the understandings of how do we deal with our trauma? How do we move forward? How do we put together strategies which are not simply looking at certain measurables that some consultant have told us the root of, but instead we go inward, and this is a tough process. This is looking at history at a much broader sense than just as we have done the short apartheid history. We need to really go much deeper, and this is upon each individual to do it in their own way, and that is really, I think, the South African way. So I'm going to stop there, but I would love to obviously continue this conversation, but yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Klaus. So before I close, please can I ask each of the speakers, yourself, Klaus, Judge Albie, and Ongama, to just give us a 30-second elevator pitch on what they got from the paper, and then we can close. And 30 seconds is 30 seconds. Klaus, did you get me?
No, I didn't. Sorry, I didn't hear you. 30 seconds elevator pitch for what?
On your paper, what is the most critical parts of the paper you think that you can give us in a quick 30-second blurb?
I feel like I just had my 30 seconds. I would say to constantly, we all have the role, and as Judge Albie mentioned already, what from his learnings and engagements with the people on the ground, we should not look over any individual of their status or of their background for what they can contribute. I mean, this is the essence of who we are as a country. It's an experiment. We are if I mean, I'm too young to know what it was like transitioning into the new era. I think we need to invigorate that ethos, that which we are built upon, and that's why it might sound a little bit dreamy, but I really do believe in returning to these ideals that we had as a country at that period, because it's through that we must work through the trauma and through the history and through all the difficulty to find the true South African way, to learn to listen to the others, to listen to the West and whoever, but remind ourselves of who we are, and to grow from the bottom up.
Thank you so much. That is Dr. Claus Kotzer, who is the writer of the paper we're discussing today. Judge Albie, your elevator pitch.
Well, what I remember, the dichotomy I felt as a law student, learning about the rule of law, justice, equity, writing the exams, And then at night going down to study class in the townships, and people just candlelight, and you just see the eyes and the mouths. And the poor people hated the law. The law was the enemy, it's the police. Chuck them into jail, but they loved justice. They would give their lives for justice. The professors loved the law, but they wouldn't give their lives for justice. And I felt torn. And only when we came to write the Constitution did the passion of the poor for justice and the grand ideas of the ages that the professors were handing down come together. And so I don't see the past as simply being a past of, in relation to the law, of cynicism. It was also one of idealism, of what we don't want to happen again, of what the law shouldn't be. And so we achieved our Constitution. The Constitutional Assembly was amazing, 400 people. Half of them had been in jail, in exile, many had been tortured, producing this wonderful document. It wasn't the lawyers, it was the people who'd suffered so much. And that's why it might be a romanticism on my part, but romanticism gave us our Constitution. It destroyed apartheid. It gave us the foundations of what we need. And I still see the reaction to me, the reaction to the looting, communities coming together, organizing, showing wonderful spontaneous solidarity. This is the strength of South Africa. And it feeds in. We need political parties. You can't diss political parties for social construction and so on, but you need that spontaneous energy of communities and of people that's got us through so much in South Africa.
Thank you, Judge Albie. And finally, Ongama.
Thank you, Rebecca. My answer to your question on what should Concord justices do is simple. I've posted a paper in the Business Day recently. Should a butterfly stop flapping its wings out of concern that the act may create a tornado down somewhere else in the part of in the world? Absolutely not. On my take from the paper, I'm excited about us continuing to write, and congratulations to you, Klaus, about the goodness of the constitutional order and how it recognizes the past that we came from, but also comes up with a vision for a future that we desire. We must work to ensure that we achieve that. And we have a duty, all of us, to make sure that that dream is realized. We can't continue to rely on the tremendous patience that is there, because we don't know up until when will it reach a threshold beyond which it can no longer be sustained. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you again to all our speakers, to Dr. Claus Kotzer for the paper that inspired conversation, Judge Albie and Ongama, who came on board to discuss the contents and how we can move forward and play our role in holding up our social contract. My name is Rebecca Sibanda, and I want to say thank you to our speakers, as well as CAS and the Midpoint, for creating a space where we can truly come and have conversations that bring us to the political center, the political midpoint, in an encouraging and in a respectful way. Please, can everybody note that the recording of this event will be posted up on the Midpoint website, so you can share it afterwards. The paper as well, written by Dr. Kotzé, will also be posted up for your further light reading. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful Tuesday further.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.